Greetings, adventure. Welcome to D20 Academy. I'm your host, Shiloh Kaneshiro, and today is episode 12, Class Spotlight on the Bard. Alright, guys, welcome to the second class spotlight from this podcast. Last week, I covered the Barbarian, and today, I'm covering the Bard. I really like doing this segment on the show, spotlighting the different classes. I want to go over the basics of what the class is, its place in fantasy pop culture, go into the stereotypes and the strengths and weaknesses of the class, get into the race and background synergy, spotlight a couple key features that are unique to the class, go over the subclasses, describe how maybe you can use the character in your campaign, what kind of players work better with a bard, or maybe what kind of players would not really, have a lot of fun playing a bard. And I want to get into all that today. And I'm really excited for this one because the Bard is my favorite class out of all of them. I'm a little biased, and so I may be making the Bard sound better than any other classes I talk about, but that's just because this is by far just my favorite class. Love this one. But let's just get right into it. All right. Let's start things off. I'll just kind of describe what a bard is, if maybe you're familiar with the class or not. Basically, bards are just masters of song, speech, and the magic that words contain, or that music contain. So in fantasy worlds in D&D, words and music have power on their own, and true bards have learned to use this power to their advantage. So that's, whether that's inspiring allies, demoralizing foes, manipulating minds, creating illusions, healing wounds, whatever. They use this magic. They've tapped into this font of special magic in the world to be able to do all these kinds of things. They're performers, storytellers, entertainers. As, people in a profession, that's what they do. And because they require charisma is the highest ability score that you want, because they use charisma for spellcasting and all their kind of abilities. They're very charismatic, outgoing people. So whether that be from being a musician to being a poet to being a a acrobat or a mime or anything like that, any kind of performer, any kind of, maybe you're a writer, a storyteller. Just any kind of person who performs and entertains. That's what kind of bards are. They do their best work in a party, and in combat they do their best work on the sidelines, buffing allies, bolstering them, making them stronger, keeping them alive, nerfing foes, right? So making their attacks weaker, hurting them. But they can also defend themselves if necessary. They're definitely not the best class when it comes to defending themselves or fighting one-on-one, which I'll get into in a second. But they do their best work kind of on the sidelines, being a support character. They're also talented in almost every area of expertise. So they're the perfect jack of all trades. So whether that be esoteric knowledge, street smarts, persuasive speech, bards have picked up a lot in their time, traveling, performing, things like that. So they are skilled at, every single area of expertise. They are, very, specifically talented in certain skills, a couple skills, just like all the other classes, but they're, also just, even better at just every class, every area, not every class, every skill, every area, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But, yeah, bards are really cool. On, a power level basis, they're definitely on the weaker side, if you're just, comparing the classes when it comes to, combat and power level. But that doesn't, I'll get into later, what kind of players work best for this. But for a player like me, I don't care as much about, maximizing my power and making myself the best I can in combat. I love the Bard just because there's such a good support unit in battle, inspiring their allies and doing all that kind of thing. That's really fun for me, and I just like the idea of being a performer and all that extroverted, charismatic character. That's really enticing to me. So that's why this class is my favorite. I just love all their abilities, everything they have, And if you have seen Critical Role, or listened to Critical Role, in the first campaign, Sam Riegel, he plays a bard named Scanlan Shortholt, and that is by far just like the best character in the whole show. I mean, Scanlan is like amazing. A lot of that comes from Sam Riegel just being a phenomenal player and storyteller. But kind of in the history of D&D, in the history of the game, bards have always kind of been looked at as like a really, really weak class. Over like all the additions, they've been definitely on the weaker side, not nearly as powerful as like wizards or fighters or anything like that. But in 5th edition, they're actually pretty good. They're not as weak as they used to be. And, you know, if you watch Critical Role, like, the bard can come in very, very clutch in certain instances. So, yeah, I just really love the bard. So I'll kind of get into the stereotypes, strengths and weaknesses, and things like that. The basic bard stereotype is a musician with, like, a lute. Probably, like, a human or a half-elf. That's kind of the basic bard stereotype. Super charismatic, funny, you know, good at improv, singing songs. That's kind of the basic bard stereotype. There's not a lot of, like, bards in pop culture, like fantasy pop culture or anything like that I'm really sure I can compare it to. But if you've seen some things from D&D, and like any real, like, you know, real play shows or just art or anything like that, typically the bard, you know, has like a guitar and they're really charismatic and things like that. So their strengths come inspiring and healing allies while nerfing enemies, like I said. So, like, inspiring their allies, healing them, and then for their enemies, like, you know, using skills like cutting words, bane, to make their enemies weaker. They also are versatile in all the skills in spellcasting, so they have a lot of versatility, which makes them actually really good for a small party. You don't really want to have a bard, like, in a super small party, because, like I said, and how I'll get into a little bit later, like, they're not good in one-on-one. That is one of their weaknesses, like weapon combat, one-on-one, isolation. They're quite weak, and if they're targeted and singled out, they can get knocked down very, very easily. They work best when they're surrounded by people who they can buff and who can protect them. But in a smaller party, bards are a really good class to have, because if you listen to my party balance episode, you know, you want to have people in the group who can each, you know, have skilled in a certain area, so that no matter what kind of problem is thrown at you, you have someone who is able to solve that problem. So, you know, you don't get stuck, or the game doesn't drag or anything like that. So in a small party where maybe you don't have enough players to be able to get all the classes to cover all those bases, it's good for someone to play a bard, because the bard is versatile in all the skills. So in the areas that the party is missing, the bard can, you know, be pretty good in those areas and take over there. So that's really useful. And also just spellcasting in general is just a very, very versatile thing. And the bard spell list has given them a lot of versatile spells, so they can do a ton. You know, healing, damaging, manipulating, illusions, all that kind of thing. Okay, so the race and background synergy. If you are trying to make the best, most optimized bard, the best races for that are half-elf, halfling, and tiefling. Both half-elf and tiefling get a +2 to charisma, and obviously the charisma is the number one ability you want to have as a bard. That's what they use for spellcasting and all their abilities. And the second most ability you want as a bard is dexterity, because dexterity is used for armor class, you know, making them harder to hit, and also for any weapon fighting they'd be doing with short swords or bows or things like that. You want dexterity for that. And then after that, I'd probably say like Constitution, just so that, you know, they can stay alive to continue healing their friends and, you know, stay alive in battle. But because both half-elf and tiefling give a +2 to charisma, they're pretty good. A halfling, if you choose a lightfoot halfling, that's one of the sub-races. If you choose a lightfoot halfling, you get only a +1 to charisma, so it's not as good as either of those. But you do get a +2 to dexterity. So that's really useful, because you want dexterity and charisma as a bard. So a lightfoot halfling is really good, because you get a +1 to charisma, +2 to dex, and those are the two highest ability scores you want as a bard. A tiefling gives +2 to charisma, but then there are other bonuses in intelligence, which is fine for a bard, because, intelligence isn't used primarily in any of their spellcasting or features, but just having a high intelligence is just good for skills and things like that. So Tiefling can make a good bard, but then a half-elf is probably the perfect bard, because the half-elf gets +2 to charisma and then +1 in 2 other abilities of your choice, so you can choose like dexterity and constitution, for example, or dexterity and intelligence, or whatever you want. So the half-elf, optimize-wise, is just really good. Also, half-elves get proficiency in like a couple skills of your choice, so you can make the bard even more skilled at certain things. So definitely the half-elf is like the best race for a bard, but halfling and tiefling are also really good. The worst races for a bard would be half-orc, dwarf, and dragonborn. Actually, basically the races that you want for a barbarian. That's just because these classes don't really give any bonuses to the thing. Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. That's false. A dragonborn does give a bonus to charisma, a little bonus to charisma. There are other bigger bonuses in strength. So actually, a dragonborn is not horrible. But a half-orc and a dwarf, they give their bonuses to strength, con, and wisdom. So they're not going to be the best classes. Also, and none of their race features have anything to do with being a bard or helping them out in that sense. So half-orc, dwarf, those are not gnome too. Those are not really the best races for a bard. So if you listen to my class spotlight on the barbarian, I talk about like the best backgrounds, the worst backgrounds, and backgrounds don't like add too much when it comes to like features, skills that actually like make a difference in like the combat and the rules of the game, and the numbers. But backgrounds are more of like a flavor thing. So the most stereotypical backgrounds and least stereotypical backgrounds is kind of what I focus on when I get to this part. It is what I mean when I say best backgrounds for bard, worst backgrounds for bard. Not that like the abilities and stuff they give are like better, because that doesn't really make too much of a difference in the game. But flavor, story-wise, the most like stereotypical backgrounds for a bard are charlatan and entertainer. Charlatans are those who, kind of go on the streets and swindle people. Pretty charismatic, tricksters, things like that. An entertainer is obviously any sort of entertainer, and that's basically exactly what a bard is. So those are the best backgrounds for a bard, story-wise. And the ones that probably don't make the most sense are hermit and soldier. Because bards thrive off of, being social, being around people, also in combat, they do their best work, like I said, when they're paired with other people who can protect them and that they can heal and buff. Having a background as a hermit, someone who lived in isolation, that doesn't make a lot of sense for a bard. Once again, if you want to make a bard who goes against the stereotype, who is not fully optimized, but you want to build them just because you think it'd be a really interesting avenue to explore, like having a half-orc bard and stuff, like that'd be really interesting to explore. That's not, that can be a really unique story you can tell. Same with the backgrounds, like being a hermit or a soldier, like as a background. It's not the stereotypical bard, but that's a really cool avenue to explore. So hermit doesn't it doesn't work very well just because hermits live in isolation, so they wouldn't have had a lot of time to, be social and like be charismatic. And then soldiers, they've been to war, they've been in battle and things like that on the front lines. So, they'd probably be more like hardened, gritty kind of people, whereas bards are typically, stereotypically, light, happy-go-lucky kind of charismatic people. Okay, so that does it for the stereotypes, race, background, synergy. Now I'm going to do a little feature spotlight. The most unique, the most standout feature of a bard is inspiration. Each class kind of has like a singularly standout feature. Most of them do. For barbarian, it was rage. For bards, it is inspiration. Inspiration is a really cool ability, and it allows you, there's a truck driving by. So sorry about that. Inspiration allows you to buff your allies. So, as a bonus action, you can choose a creature within 60 feet of you, and you give them a bardic inspiration die. So depending on your level, it will be like a D6 or a D8 or a D10. And in the next 10 minutes, that ally can expend that die and roll it to add it to any D20 roll they make. So whether on an attack, an ability check, a saving throw. So basically, as a bonus action, you can inspire them and give them a dice, and they can use that dice once in the next 10 minutes to something they do to allow them to get a higher roll, be more successful. So that's basically it's a really simple feature. It makes sense flavor-wise. It's really cool. And you have a couple amount of uses of that. I think you have an amount of uses equal to your charisma modifier. So inspiration is really cool. That's kind of the standout feature of a bard. And flavor-wise, you can kind of describe how you're inspiring them. Maybe singing them a little song, or inspiring them, giving them a speech, or any kind of thing like that. So inspiration is a really cool feature. And then the second feature I want to spotlight is Jack of all trades. This feature allows them to get a bonus to all the skills that they're not already proficient in. So if you're not sure what that means, but basically in the game, you have different proficiencies in different skills, because there's all kinds of skills, right? Athletics, acrobatics, persuasion, deception, nature, history, all these different skills. And you choose a couple skills to be proficient in, depending on your class and background. And so you get a bonus to whatever those skills are, depending on your level. But with Jack of all trades, for all the skills you're not proficient in that you already get a bonus to, that you're getting this big bonus to, you also just get a little bonus to all the other skills, just making you just that much better at just everything. Just making you way more versatile, way more helpful, just in every situation. So that's a really cool feature for the bard. It really just inspiration, Jack of all trades. It really helps cement what the bard is. Like the barbarian, the bard, at least in 5th edition, is very specific. It makes sense what the bard is, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. They're a very unique, very defined class, and that can be really helpful for new players, because other classes can get a little confusing on kind of what their strengths and weaknesses are, or kind of how they're different from other classes. But the bard, very standout, very unique. It makes sense what they do, and the features, inspiration, and Jack of all trades kind of helps just cement their versatility, their them helping buff their allies, things like that. Okay, so before we finish off this episode, this one's a little bit shorter. Definitely shorter than Monday's, which I think was almost an hour long. So that was kind of crazy. I'll get into the subclasses of the bard just before we end off this episode. So let's get into those. So subclasses for the bard are called colleges. Subclasses all have kind of different names depending on what class you are. So for barbarians, they're called paths. They're called primal paths. For bards, they're bard colleges. For monks, they're traditions or ways or something. But it's just a subclass. So when you hit a certain level, you choose a subclass, and that's a different path you go on. It specifies more of the kind of direction you want to go with the character, and as you level up, you'll get different features depending on what subclass you chose. So there are two subclasses for the bard. They're the College of Lore and the College of Valor. The College of Lore is kind of just your basic bard. Kind of just expands on that a little bit. You've picked up lots of knowledge from everywhere. You enjoy learning. You're an avid reader. You're curious. But you're an entertainer. You tell stories from things you've read. Still kind of like a basic bard. What the College of Lore does is it expands spellcasting, so you can choose extra spells. You even get proficient in more skills. And the kind of the standout feature of the College of Lore is cutting words, which allows you to expend a bardic inspiration die. And instead of inspiring an ally, you roll it and you minus that from an attack of an enemy. So, kind of flavor-wise, you're cutting words, insulting them, and using your words to cast a magic spell over them to make them weaker, make them miss their attack or fail their whatever thing they're trying to do. So that's College of Lore, pretty good. It just expands spellcasting, expands versatility of the bard. The second college is the College of Valor, and this is a weapon-based bard. This helps balance out the weaknesses that a bard has. So College of Valor gives you proficiencies in shields, armor, martial weapons, so that gives you like attacks, extra attack, and things like that. So you can actually be pretty good in like melee combat, or like with weapons. That you can be able to defend yourself more. You can survive better on 1-to-1. So College of Valor kind of picks up the weaknesses that the bard has. So that's really cool. At 14th level, there's actually a feature called like Battle Magic, where you can cast a spell and then make an attack with your weapon. So it kind of just helps like weave like weapon magic and combat with your spell casting, which you already have as a bard. So those are two colleges, College of Lore, College of Valor. Both are really good. I think they're both pretty equal when it comes to power level. It's just that College of Lore just helps you, whatever you're good at as a bard, just even better. And then College of Valor kind of picks up what the weaknesses of a bard have, so it's just a little more balanced and versatile. And depending on like your flavor-wise, kind of like the story that you create for your character, either of those could work. But those are the subclasses. So I'll just talk a little bit about kind of like what players are good at, should be playing a bard, what players maybe won't have a lot of fun. So any players like me should play bards. So anyone who cares a lot about role-playing, finds just the concept of the bard, really cool, can maybe easily entertain themselves, maybe even writes poetry or writes music, or, as a storyteller, maybe someone also like really charismatic. Those people will have a fun time playing bard. Because in battle, they're more of a support unit, like they're not doing a lot, like it doesn't appear like they're doing a lot, like they're not killing the baddie, they're not doing the crazy spells or anything like that. Instead, they're just making their allies more powerful, making their enemies weaker. Obviously, really helpful in the long run, and it is powerful, and they can definitely come in clutch in certain situations. But if you're someone who, kind of, and this is not a bad thing, but cares more about, being in a spotlight when it comes to combat, you want to go in there, you want to slay the big baddie with your sword or with your powerful spells, the bard probably isn't for you. For someone like me who doesn't care as much about combat or optimizing themselves, cares more about the story and the, just kind of loves the idea of a bard, then yeah, I think you should play a bard. Bards are really fun. They're really, really cool. Just the class, everything about the class is just so awesome. Like I said, really defined, really unique. So if you don't really care as much about being really powerful in combat or being the most powerful you can be, then the bard can definitely be a class for you. But if you're someone who, kind of cares about what they're going to do in battle and, kind of wants to optimize their character, the bard is comparatively a weaker class, so maybe you won't have a lot of fun playing a bard. But yeah, there's just explore it if you want. You can kind of look into it more if you're interested in. Like I said, I love this class, my favorite class. A lot of cool things about it. But yeah, so hopefully I covered kind of everything there. I didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty rules. Just in this podcast, I just don't really ever want to get into that kind of thing. I want to make it digestible for people who maybe haven't even played the game, so they're not really sure how the game works, or for people who, just are not really intellectual when it comes to that, or are good at figuring out the rules or remembering those. Because D&D is not about the rules. It's about telling the story, it's about playing this game. The rules are just a vessel to help, help add tension, help add the luck and things like that. So that's the bard. There it is. So yeah. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you learned something. I hope I answered some of your questions. Look out for this week's last episode coming out probably tomorrow or on Friday. That one's probably going to be an exciting one, so look out for that. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.